Last year for 31 for 31, I had to do a swap out once I found out that First Strike is actually Police Story 4. I didn't want to skip over a film in the franchise, so I decided to move First Strike to this year so I could pick up Police Story 3 Supercop, also just known as Supercop in the US. It's worth noting that there are two cuts of the film, the Hong Kong release and the US release, the US release just being a shorter version where the Hong Kong release is the full film. Now I do later in this series cover a film where I watch both the theatrical and director's cut, but I didn't do that here because basically the US cut is just a shorter version for no reason, and I'm content on just watching the full cut of the film and calling it done. Supercop picks up back with Inspector Chan, played by Jackie Chan. This time they're looking for a super cop, and of course Chan is the perfect choice. So Chan is sent to team up with Michelle Yeoh's character to go undercover to bust up a Chinese drug dealer. This time Stanley Tong takes over the direction from Jackie Chan, and it's a notable decrease in direction. Supercop is a lot of fun. So far the Police Story films have been an absolute blast, but the film leans a little harder on being a comedy while not being able to kind of balance both the comedy and darker tones as well as the other two films. There's several moments in the film that it feels like it's supposed to be played seriously but feels a little too light to kind of carry it. There's times where the film is begging to be taken more seriously, but the comical tone takes away from some of the tension. However, you swap out some of the tonal inconsistencies for a really solid plotline as Jackie and Michelle's characters go deep undercover. This setup can lead to some truly funny moments while also having some really intense moments as well that can shift a little bit more gracefully thanks to its stronger narrative structure that the film actually has. Chan's character isn't really explored anymore here, rather it's just a job and he's the right person for it. The other two films really explored Chan's character, and here we get a much more one-dimensional character that's really propped up by Michelle Yeoh's character. The two have some really good on-screen chemistry that's really helped to alleviate some of the lack of character development that I was really missing in this third installment. Now let's talk about the goods. Going into a Police Story film after the first two, my main question is, how are the stunts? And they're really good here as well. Also leading into those beloved outtakes during the credits. There's some big spectacle set pieces that are a lot of fun, the hand-to-hand combat is great, and there's some stunt work with a helicopter and a train that's honestly kind of mind-blowing. If you like stunt work, then this, along with the first two films, are a must-watch. The bombastic set pieces are really what carries a lot of water for the film, where the first two films had these great set pieces that also had great characters to kind of back it. Supercop mainly just has these great set pieces that are, in terms of the action, on par with the first two films, even if there's slightly less of it here. This is just a lot of fun and is a must-watch for action fans, and it's nice to see Chan's Inspector Chan again, even if it as a whole felt a little unnecessary as a continuation to the first two films. I definitely recommend checking this one out, and it does add as a good third installment to the series, and I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. And now I can finally check out First Strike. Well, just when I thought I was caught up to finally watch First Strike, lo and behold, there's a direct sequel to Supercop, also directed by Stanley Tong, released in 1993. This being more of a spin-off for Michelle Yeoh's character, but I ended up picking up the film on VHS because the DVD is like right at the, this is a little too much money for a DVD when I feel like it's probably going to get a Blu-ray port at some point price. Plus, the VHS was dirt cheap. However, I did watch the film with an English dub because that was the only option that's available, which honestly might have made the experience a little worse, but it did kind of help me get to the end of the film because the film itself was pretty boring, and that led to some funny moments. The film follows Michelle Yeoh's character after the events of Supercop, where Hong Kong requests her to stop a gang of thieves. Michelle's character feels somewhat less developed as a main character than she did as a side character in Supercop. Sure, we get some conflict set up with her boyfriend who ends up being involved in the gang that she's trying to stop, but we don't really build their relationship. We don't really see the conflict through her character, but rather is just blatantly told this for the story. Nothing here feels organic whatsoever. Everything feels like it's only here because the story needs something to move along to get to the next scene. Michelle does a great job in the lead despite the bad dubbing, but she doesn't really have the screen presence like she did in Police Story 3. She's the main character, but she doesn't really feel like a main character. But we're talking about a film connected to the Police Story universe, right? How's the action? It's fine. It's fine. It's nothing like the previous three films and feels pretty scaled back. The stunt pieces are nowhere near Police Story 3. It's rather just kind of standard gunplay and hand-to-hand action that any other 90s action thriller you'd rent from the video store would have had. There's plenty of it, sure, but none of it's very more memorable. The film is on the shorter side, clocking in at just over 90 minutes for this cut of the film. While I definitely felt the runtime, I didn't really hate my time with this movie either. There's large, uninteresting sections of the film, but it's a film that I don't think requires a lot of your attention. It would be a solid background movie. Doing some house chores or want something in the background to peek up at when the action gets going, here's Supercop 2, and I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. Finally, on to First Strike, the fourth installment into the Police Story series, and a film that I've been looking forward to since last year when I had to redraw it. And I am unfortunately here to say that so far, this is my least favorite in the franchise. First off, the Blu-ray release only comes with the English dub. There's no original Cantonese here. Also, the film is heavily cut, clocking in at only 84 minutes, which according to the IMDb, the runtime is actually 107 minutes. However, I don't really want those extra 20 minutes because I struggled to stay awake with this one. Jackie Chan returns as Inspector Chan, but in the English dub, they literally just call him Jackie instead of the character's actual name. This time, Chan is hired by the CIA to recover a nuclear warhead, along the way going to Australia and taking on Russians as well as a shark. Every complaint I have about Police Story 3 Supercop is felt here tenfold. Directed again by Stanley Tong, Chan's character gets zero development and actually feels kind of like a reduction from a Supercop into a blundering clown that doesn't feel like this kind of carefree martial arts badass like in the previous movies. The movie leans way harder into the comedy, and it's very basic, one-dimensional and almost childish comedy that was way more cringe than funny. This film has no identity compared to the large line of Jackie Chan movies like the 3 previous installments. I'd actually go as far to say that this one's probably my least favorite Chan movie I might have seen, at least from memory. The music in the film is also horrendous and feels like stock string hits that would have been used in like a parody movie, but it's used earnestly here. Every scene feels strung together, but with little connecting tissue that feels like if you just like dip out to go use the restroom and came back, it would feel like a completely different movie. Each scene only feels like it's here to be set up for some kind of lackluster action set piece. Speaking of those set pieces, this is probably the most bland and forgettable in the series so far, except for 2 scenes that I thought were standouts in the film, and honestly might make worth watching the film alone just for those. The first one being right towards the beginning of the film with snowboarding, and the other was a pretty impressive underwater fight scene. These 2 scenes were great that were unfortunately used for this movie. The first 3 installments in the Police franchise are 100% worth a watch, while Supercop 2 and First Strike I really wouldn't recommend that much, and I'm giving First Strike a 5 out of 10. It's mainly bumped up from a 4 because I thought those 2 action set pieces were great, so I'm going to give it a 5 instead of a 4, but yeah, it's a 5 out of 10. This one was pretty disappointing. Geostorm is a movie I decided to skip out on when it was released in theaters. It was just a movie that looked very meh. It was panned by critics, but when I came across it at Big Lots on clearance for $1.25 with a 20% off coupon, and considering that I do like disaster movies, well, why not? Actually, I still haven't even yet opened this, so enjoy this unboxing. The film stars Gerard Butler, and outside of like a couple movies, most everything he's in kind of falls into like the mid to bad category, and that's kind of where Geostorm lands, kind of. The film follows Butler's character Jake, who's a super genius who helps design Dutch Boy. See, in the future, or now past 2019, the climate has changed so drastically that more and more devastating storms have been affecting the world. The Dutch Boy system uses complex satellites to control the weather and help reduce those natural disasters. After Jake gets fired for his uncontrollable mouth by his little brother, 3 years go by and some really nasty natural disasters start happening again as the US is about to turn over the control of Dutch Boy. See, the world is helping out with Dutch Boy coming together as like one people, so it turns from hand to hand. With problems happening under the US watch, the only man that can fix Dutch Boy, of course, is Gerard Butler. Once up in space, a large conspiracy starts to unravel, which turns this natty disaster movie into an espionage thriller that honestly went a long way in helping set it apart from the million of disaster movies out there. Really, this is a mystery movie with a disaster as a background, and it's a lot of pulpy schlock that's easy to gulp down a few beers and some extra buttery popcorn. You're not going to go into this movie expecting the film to do any more than try to be a spectacle despite some hilarious bad CGI that kind of adds to its charm. Rather than a big blockbuster roller coaster ride like The Avengers or Inception, this is more of a top shelf sci-fi original film. This is like one of those really fun rides at a carnival while you're not sure if it's going to break or part or not, and that's kind of part of the enjoyment. The film is predictable, but it takes some fun approaches to that predictability. It's willing to lean somewhat somewhat into its own absurdity that adds to some of the fun of the viewing, despite trying to lose you in the weeds of its nonsense science that the film is trying to present as plausible, and despite how big the film is trying to be while looking cheap, from bad CG or green screen to this weird soft looks in the cinematography, but it all comes together in a way that really kind of shouldn't be as appetizing as it is. Kind of like a fillet of fish. It might be one of the worst sandwiches in the world, but I can't get enough of it because it just all works together in this kind of weird, gross way, and that's kind of how I feel about Geostorm. This is, don't get me wrong, a bad movie, but I think it's because it's not aware of how bad it actually is, mixed with some genuine moments of fun disaster spectacle, that it really becomes a fun way to spend an hour and 50 with some equally unhealthy junk food, that I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10, but like a fun 5 out of 10. The Midnight Swim is a mockumentary found footage movie about three sisters returning home after their mother disappears during a deep water dive at Spirit Lake. During their time back at Mom's, they hook back up with Josh, someone they knew from a while back, and the four end up fighting a lot more with each other as their discretions and past comes back up. The film focuses on generational trauma and expectations and how that can ripple through siblings in different ways, which is where the film really finds its stride. However, most of the film feels inconsequential as most of the film feels directionless. With the film being centered around June making a documentary out of the trip, you can feel that June's character doesn't really have an aim to create a story out of what she's documenting. It comes off more as like a found footage than a documentary that unfortunately feels more staged than natural, also leading to a frustrating ending that, without spoilers, presents the illusion-breaking moment that unfortunately a lot of these films have, breaking the film's own rules despite presenting an interesting concept that doesn't fit within the parameters of the film itself. Honestly, the meat and taters of the film here is actually kind of solid, to the point to where I kind of wish the film was more of a straightforward narrative. You have good performances here, and you're presenting some interesting themes and lore that would have been really cool to explore rather than wasting time trying to make the footage seem, air quotations, real. Plus, having the film being without the mockumentary coding would have helped with the ending, but also would have really opened up the story for more surreal moments that I think the film was really yearning to do. If you want to make a mockumentary, that's cool. I enjoy a good mockumentary, but you're trapping yourself within a box and you're trying to box in a story that really needs a void to reach out into to explore the themes of the film's past surface value, which it really doesn't. I feel like I pretty much said everything I have to say about this one. I ended up watching this one twice because it took so long to eventually sit down to write this review that I completely forgot what the film was about, so I gave it a second watch. Now, writing this directly after watching the film for a second time, this is pretty much as I can muster up about the film because it just didn't offer a whole lot. I feel like the film was a 4 out of 10 the first time I watched it, and I still feel like that, so it's a 4 out of 10. Firestarter is a movie that I've heard of before, and I came across it one time years ago when Walmart decided to randomly just stock a handful of Scream Factory releases with the Slippies, and I pretty much bought one of each of them. But the years go by, and I'm not gonna lie to you by saying that I honestly really didn't care about watching this one. Now, after seeing it, I really feel like I was sleeping on this one because I really enjoyed the film a lot, despite having some issues with it. The film is an adaptation of a Stephen King book of the same title about Andrew McGee and Vicky McGee, who take part in a government experiment to harness psychic abilities, where the experiment goes wrong, with the exception of Andrew and Vicky, who end up having a child named Charlie, who has the power of pyrokinesis. Charlie being played by Drew Barrymore in one of her earliest roles, while Vicky ends up dying and Andrew and Charlie are on the run. This is how the film pretty much opens up, and from there, it's a tight cat and mouse with a child who has an unwielded power that is very much like a powder keg the entire movie. This obviously leading to a spectacle ending that was awesome. The story of the film I found to be really intriguing, especially making it more of a character-driven piece rather than being lost in the sauce of the experiment and conspiracies. We spent a lot of time with Andrew and Charlie to build their bond and characters that makes it integral to the climax of the film that actually pulls you in. The film does everything to present itself as serious and never drives away from that, besides one character that is one of the biggest issues I have with the film. Every character feels fleshed out, every character has a certain level of depth to them, except for one of the main antagonists in George C. Scott's character, Rainbird. Rainbird. Rainbird is a good right-hand man, but his plan at the end of the film just didn't really connect. I felt like it didn't really have any motive or really make much sense. I'm not sure what the angle they were trying to go for with it was, and maybe it's a detail I missed on a first viewing. I definitely want to watch the movie again for sure, so maybe it'll connect with me more on a second viewing, but that climax scene with him in the barn just felt kind of forced and unfortunately very cheesy for a film that was otherwise taking itself pretty seriously. That led into the spectacle of the climax that was really good. In terms of pacing, I felt like the first act and the final act really blew by, where there's a section in the middle where she's at the shop where I kind of really felt the film start to kind of drag its toes. I feel like the film didn't really do enough with Martin Sheen's Captain Hollister and the shop, and while it did build the relationship between Charlie and Rainbird to get us to the climax in a very believable way of how they built their relationship, it didn't build the walkway for the actual climax with Rainbird's character, which really kind of made that section feel a little bit weaker retrospectively. On a production standpoint, the film looks great and sounds great. The score by Tangerine Dream is fantastic, and I really love the look of the film, using some wide-angle lenses in some pretty clever ways. The fire in the film is well used and at times can be kind of gnarly, but I will say Drew Barrymore as a lead in this movie, it was you could definitely see that she was pretty new to acting. I was a little surprised when I went in to kind of rate this on how middling the reviews on this film actually are, because I felt like this is actually a pretty good little hidden gem that does have some issues, but for the most part was really good. It's like if Carrie was written by Alex Jones, and I'm giving a 7.5 out of 10 to it. Definitely check this one out. I enjoyed it quite a bit, and I've heard the remake is awful. Akira Kurosawa is back once again to the challenge, being one of my all-time favorite directors that I've been slowly working my way through his filmography, and now I'm definitely on the back end of it with High and Low, released on Criterion, and one of the last films I picked up from Kurosawa from the Criterion collection. It's a film that is regarded as one of the greatest films ever made, and a film that I've been dragging my feet on just because I love samurai movies. And this is not one of Kurosawa's samurai movies. High and Low is from 1963 and brings together once again one of the best cinematic duos in history, with Kurosawa as director and Toshiro Mifune as the central character, Kingo Gondo, a shoe factory manager, where the film opens up with Gondo and the other big shots of the shoe factory as the three men try to convince Gondo to join them to overthrow the old man running the factory to make shoes more stylish and cheaper so they would fall apart quicker so people would have to buy more shoes. Yes, Gondo wants to make the shoes more stylish, but he does not want to sacrifice quality. This leads into an argument and a play for Gondo's position to take the business from him. However, quickly after the meeting, his chauffeur's son, a friend of Gondo's son, is kidnapped. The two boys were just outside playing when the chauffeur's son gets kidnapped. That was actually mistaken for Gondo's son. The kidnapper wants 30 million yen, or he will kill the boy along with the police's help. We begin our mystery to catch the kidnapper. Right out of the gate, the film is beautifully shot. I'm not sure there's a director in history that has a stronger visual style than Kurosawa. Kurosawa's style isn't like a super lavish one in terms of cinematography, but he uses every frame to paint an emotion with it, and the film has some outstanding blocking. Like during the scene where Gondo and his chauffeur Aoki are talking about paying the ransom, and Gondo doesn't want to, visually turning his back to him, the detectives, and the audience. Kurosawa's filmography is littered with moments like this, and High and Low really personifies this. There's countless moments, without spoiling the film, through its runtime of doing things like this that really amplify the narrative and the emotion of the scenes. Also, just as a quick visual side note, I love the moment to use a sparse color of pink during one of the scenes in the otherwise black and white film. Toshiro Mifune is one of my favorite actors, and he's terrific here, even if he doesn't get a lot of screen time, surprisingly. Most of the middle to back end of the film follows the police trying to catch the kidnappers and uncover why, to which the film does an amazing job at subverting your expectations, and is honestly one that kept me guessing until the very end. This is how you build a mystery. You can't see the ending coming at all, which made the film so engaging, constantly hooking you with more and more detail as the plot quickly paces along. Speaking of pacing, this film has amazing pacing for a film that is almost 2.5 hours long. It felt much more like an hour and a half as it just blows by. I think my biggest hang up currently is whether or not the film would hold up as strong on a second viewing. Films like this, I personally have a hard time rating because, yes, I was really invested in the film. However, I'm not sure how invested I would be on a second viewing because what pulls me into this film so much was the mystery. There's been other films that I was really hooked into the film for its mystery, but on a rewatch I wasn't as connected with the film since I already knew what the mystery was going into it. That could easily be the case here with High and Low. How effective could the film be on a second viewing with already knowing what happens? I'm not sure. It's a film that I definitely want to rewatch to see how it holds up on a second viewing, and it's a film that could potentially go up or down on that second viewing. But for now, I'm going to give this one an 8.5 out of 10. I strongly recommend checking this one out, especially if you're looking to get into Kurosawa, and it's available on Max if you want to stream it. And I will see y'all later. 8.5 out of 10. Bye. I found my copy of New York, New York on DVD at the Dollar Tree before it became the $1.25 tree, and yes, I'm still mad about that. This is a film directed by Martin Scorsese, one of my all-time favorite directors, and stars Robert De Niro and Liza Minnelli. I will say going into this one, this is a film I've heard the title of and the theme of, but as far as that goes, I went into this one pretty blind. I haven't seen all of Martin Scorsese's films yet. There's a small handful of his narrative films I haven't seen yet, and I really haven't watched very many of his documentaries, but he's a director that I really want to try to watch everything from. With that being said, New York, New York is probably my least favorite I've seen from the Eyebrow Man himself. And with that being said, it's not a bad movie either. The film opens up on Robert De Niro's character Jimmy Doyle on VJ Day at a party as he bounces from girl to girl, instantly becoming a sleazeball. He ends up spotting Francine Evans, played by Liza Minnelli, and Francine blows him off time and time again until he basically weasels his way to her. When Jimmy is on his way to audition as a jazz saxophone player, Francine gets dragged along, and with her singing ability and his sax playing, they land a gig that she ends up bailing on. This starting their very toxic and tumultuous relationship, as basically Francine just wants love and to live her life, while Jimmy can't stand her casting a shadow over him. The film is listed as a musical, and while there's plenty of musical numbers, the set pieces are more diegetic than something like a more traditional musical. Still with that, these musical set pieces are long, and honestly, I felt the 2.5 hour runtime for sure. I do want to say that this film is 100% a 10 out of 10 for somebody. I can see people really loving this film. However, this is not a film for me. This just isn't my style of film, and while I do find a lot of the direction and scale impressive from a technical standpoint, both De Niro and Minnelli are fantastic in the leads, I really couldn't get into this film hardly at all. Out of the gate, De Niro's Jimmy Doyle is a pretty abhorrent person, and he constantly gets worse as the film progresses, but the film tries to kind of get you to like him to a certain degree, and there's no reason I would believe Francine or really anyone who would love this guy. He is a constant bridge burner, and maybe if there was like love at first sight, but their relationship really kind of starts off from a point of being nagged. Maybe their music is what ties them together. We do have a scene where Francine and Jimmy play together for the first time that's supposed to be like this dynamic duo setup, but the rest of the film doesn't really explore this, as Jimmy just grabs for power from within the band, but Francine kind of just goes off to do her own thing that leaves Jimmy to fall apart. Francine has all the power despite Jimmy demanding the power, and thus has nothing. This is an interesting idea that doesn't feel fully explored and kind of leaves their on-screen relationship to feel kind of pointless. Like, why does she love him so much? We get all the great emotional scenes with outstanding acting, but that's unfortunately left somewhat hollow at its core when their on-screen relationship feels so flimsy in its construction. Between the musical numbers, the lavish production, great camera work, terrific performances, I can really see why people would love this film despite my issues. There's a lot of moments between Francine and Jimmy that I really love, and the skeleton of the narrative on paper is great for sure. Maybe someone else could really connect into this relationship a lot more than I could have, but I think for me it's a 6 out of 10. The Tribe from 2014 is the directorial debut of Miroslav Slobodchvitsky. I have no idea if I'm saying that right, but it's a film that's been on my watch list pretty much since 2014. I found the Blu-ray that is now out of print at a Half Price Books for $10 and grabbed it. The film is a Ukrainian film about a deaf boy joining a boarding school for deaf children, and the entire film has zero dialogue, only sign language. The sign language also has no subtitles and is also sign language in Ukrainian. But while at the boarding school, the boy joins a gang of hooligans that pimps out some of the schoolgirls and other nefarious acts. When the boy falls in love with one of the girls who is being pimped, he finds it hard to fit into the tribe. Out of the gate, I have to be honest and say that while I really commend Miroslav Slobodfisky on sticking true to his vision, but with the lack of subtitles, you also lose a lot of the narrative and a lot of the nuance of the film that leaves you, the viewer, with a more primitive story that at times can be hard to get into. Apparently, the idea behind this was because Slobodfisky wanted to pay homage to silent films and apparently was inspired back as a child in school when deaf students would sign to each other, stating they communicated with emotion and passion on the highest levels. This does leave the viewer to really get a raw experience for sure, but also leaves out the full story that doesn't let the viewer get the full experience without being fluent in Ukrainian sign language. The film also has some beautiful cinematography with these long shots that are really well done, but it also has these moments of really long, drawn out sex scenes that really do nothing but pad the runtime. I personally am just someone who kind of hates sex scenes for no reason in movies, and I will say that I think most sex scenes in movies are pointless. So to have these really long, drawn out ones really kind of took me out of the experience and dragged on the runtime. Outside of that, the film has some truly unnerving moments that is paired with its silence that is actually very loud. There is some gnarly moments that really got under my skin. The lack of music also adding to the noise of the film itself, that definitely works as a mood point. We follow this boy that in a way eagerly gets wrapped into this underbelly of the school that after a while really feels like it's just what the school is, and the air quotations downfall of our main character is one that can be stomach churning if you get into the story. There's a lot here that I liked about the tribe, but I will be honest in saying that its uncompromising nature did make the experience as a whole lesser for me. I understand what the point of the film here is, but not knowing how to communicate with these characters did make the film at times hard to emotionally connect to and hard to follow. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the whole point of the film is to make the viewer feel like the outsider, as to view these characters differently than the way they view themselves, because we have two different ways of communication that neither of us really have access to. Still though, in the end, it did kind of hurt the viewing experience for me, so I'm going to give this one a 6.5 out of 10. It's one that could go up or down on a second viewing, and I would definitely probably watch this again. But for now, I'm going to stick with a 6.5 out of 10. Sailor Suit and Machine Gun is an Arrow release I picked up during one of the Barnes & Noble sales, and pretty much the title alone sold me on the film, but the film did sound really interesting as well. Released in 1981 and directed by Shinji Siamai, Sailor Suit and Machine Gun follows a teenage girl after the death of the Madoka Yakuza clan leader becomes their new leader. The boss named his nephew as the new heir to the throne, but his nephew dies in a car crash, leaving behind his daughter, Izumi, who now becomes the leader of the Madoka family. The family is down to only 4 members, with Izumi being the 5th, and the rival gangs don't take them seriously, while Fatso, a leader of a rival Yakuza and drug dealer, is looking for the heroin that Izumi's father had smuggled, this leading pretty much to an all-out war. The film is a genre bender that takes the typical Yakuza story and kind of plays into its tropes and stereotypes to a comedic effect, all while being centered around a teenage girl who is thrust into the criminal underbelly that can levy some true implications and horrors. The film can gracefully bounce between these tones as to be effective in both its silliness of its premise while also confronting you with the dark realities of this lifestyle, while also making a commentary on the facade and honor that these organizations try to represent and the consequences of the do-gooders. This isn't a one-trick pony of a film, but rather a deeply complex take on a rather played out story that offers a lot to the viewer with some truly great moments. This set from Arrow comes with 2 different cuts of the film, the theatrical cut and the director's cut. I decided to watch both of them, and while I enjoyed the theatrical cut, I really loved the director's cut. That cut added about 20 minutes to the runtime, but I also felt like it had better pacing than the theatrical cut. It didn't really seem to add too much in terms of the narrative without going into spoilers, but it did genuinely help the pacing of the film. But it was on this second viewing that really opened me up a lot more to the film, as I could not only see more of what was going on because of a different set of expectations going in, but also I could see a lot more more within the scene structures that I missed on a first viewing that really adds to the experience of seeing what the film is doing with its manipulation of expectation. I still think some of the weaker aspects of the film are the acting. A lot of the acting is stiff and line delivery can be a little awkward at times. I also want to mention that there is a really impressive oneer in the film, but this is such an easy film to recommend as it can balance between these tones really well. That adds a lot of fun to the viewing experience with some great filmmaking. I gave the theatrical cut in my first viewing a 7 out of 10, but I'm going to give the director's cut, which I honestly think should just be the cut you should watch, an 8 out of 10. It's held back by some of the acting for sure, but honestly, this could potentially go up on a third viewing, and I'm honestly looking forward to that third rewatch. So this one's getting an 8 out of 10 for now. In Takashi Miike's 117 directorial credits at the time of recording this, I'm sure there's some of those I've never even heard of before, and that's exactly where MPD Psycho comes into play. My wife came up to me with a copy of MPD Psycho 1 in her hands at Half Price Books while I was looking at the Blu-rays and said, "Do you have this? It's from Takashi Miike," and I was like, "Nope, never even heard of it." After buying it and coming home, I found out that it's actually a 6-episode miniseries, so I had to order the other 2 sets to get the complete series. Takashi Miike is one of my favorite directors and has appeared in almost every 31 for 31. MPD Psycho, though, is a miniseries based on the manga that I honestly know nothing about, so I'm not going to compare it to the source material at all. I do want to put into some perspective, this is a project Miike did in 2000, so it's sandwiched right between some of his best work in my opinion, between Audition, Dead or Alive 1 and 2, and Visitor Q, Ichi the Killer, and The Happiness of the Katakuras. When this dude cooks, he cooks. The series follows Yusuke Kobayashi, a detective whose wife was killed by Shinji Nishizono. I think I'm saying that right. Out of the shock of the grisly sight, he develops multiple personalities and replaces disorder in that diagnosis with detective, and bam, you got MPD Psycho. The series is a puzzle to hunt down Nishizono that can bounce from body to body as a somewhat virus, leaving behind massive and grisly scenes while we are constantly being asked who is Kazuhiko Amiya and Lucy Monostone. First off, the DVD quality in these releases are really bad. It feels more like a VHS rip than a DVD and has a weird 4:3 letterbox aspect ratio with some massive compression issues. Honestly, going into episode 3 and 4 of disc 2, after the first disc, I was super excited because not only was the premise very interesting, but this was full tilt unhinged Miike. This isn't super gory like Ichi the Killer is. It is gruesome, but it's so unhinged in its editing that I was just like really into it. I do want to say that the series does have some censoring according to the back of the box, that the series was made for Japanese TV and has some censoring and they try to remove it to the best that they could, but the original footage is gone. However, because of the editing and the series presentation, I could easily argue that this was all done by choice, and you could probably believe it. The series messes with the heads of the characters and the mystery of trying to find Nishizono. Man, I feel like that is so hard for me to say, but I feel like that purposely messes with the heads of the audience as well. The visual effects are terrible throughout the series besides the gore effects, but it's so blatant about it that it kind of comes off as like intentionally bad. The whole series looks super cheap, but everything as a whole as a production kept me constantly guessing if this is actually happening or even if it's happening in a way that is being presented. And it seems like the answer to that question was mostly yes, but there's so many intercuts, fast snippets, time manipulation, set design choices, literally removing characters mid-scene that generally fucked with my head. The entire runtime is filled with hyperactive cutting and effects, while also leaving in these long shots that's honestly worth watching the entire thing just from an editing standpoint. I could never tell, like, is this intentional or not? Like, it's just so all over the place. However, the first 2 episodes are the high point of the series. After that, we spend a lot of time with chunks that doesn't really need to be here. This is a 6-episode series with every episode being around 50 minutes long, and honestly, this could have been a better 2.5 hour, maybe 3 hour film. I really felt like it was a slog to get through to the end of the series. Despite there being moments that would pull me back into the narrative, there's just a lot of bloat in this series that led to kind of an unfortunately unsatisfying ending. The series did make me want to check out out what the manga is like. It had a lot of really interesting ideas and themes, along with some truly chilling and gruesome moments, but ultimately kind of fizzled out toward the back half. This is one that I would give a rewatch to at some point in time, but it isn't going to be anytime super soon, and I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10, with those first 2 episodes being like an 8, episodes 3 and 4 being like a 4 or 5 out of 10, and then episodes 5 and 6 being like a 5 and a 6. So that's kind of my rating for that. So yeah, bye. Stanley Kubrick is one of my favorite directors, but I haven't seen his full filmography yet, with 2001 A Space Odyssey being one of my most anticipated from him because I'm a huge sci-fi fan, but I've also seen clips and chunks of the film in the past and always wanted to sit down to watch this thing fully front to finish. Not only was this film drawn for this year's 31 for 31, but I ended up getting to watch this one for the first time front to finish at a 70mm 4K showing at the Gateway Film Center, and leaving the film I felt pretty disappointed. I was a little surprised that throughout the runtime of how much I just was not connecting with this film, despite seeing some masterful stuff in the film. If you don't know what 2001 A Space Odyssey is, the film follows a mysterious artifact that appears in front of apes, granting them an evolutionary step that leads into a great transition into the future. The mysterious artifact or monolith is found on the moon, which launches a space mission to Jupiter to find out its origins. Along with the 2 spacemen is a supercomputer with artificial intelligence named Howl. This is my genuine experience with the film. I absolutely loved the opening of the film. The ape costumes look amazing, and I love the ideas presented here. That intelligence is this monolithic thing to represent evolution technically, and I do like the echoing of the theme as the technology can also act as a evolutionary digression as well. The setup from the apes into finding the monolith I was just really into. The film is beautifully shot. There is some amazing sets and amazing effects that really makes me wonder how they filmed it. This is generational filmmaking that will and has stood the test of time. The beautiful use of music amplifies the surrealist moments and adding scope to the film. However, once we get into the section with Howl, I'm out. This is where the film completely loses me, as I felt the film not only disconnected to the previous material that we've been watching, but I also found it to be pretty narratively dry, metaphorically on the nose, and lacking any real depth or character compared to the first 2 acts of the film. This takes the pacing down to a snail's race for me that really dragged on the film beyond belief. I do think that the end of the film tries to staple together the overall theme of humanity and life to make the film feel like a more cohesive piece, but I don't think it was a strong enough hold. To put in perspective, the first 2 acts are like for me a 9 out of 10, and the act with Howl is more like maybe a 3 or a 4. It really feels like a completely different movie that is cobbled onto the first half of the film, and I really couldn't believe when I left the film that I felt this way that I did about it, because I kind of went in expecting to absolutely love it. I did, however, decide to give the film a second viewing, funny enough, on my copy on VHS, so this Blu-ray to this day has still never been played. I will say that I kind of like the overall vibe of the film on VHS a little bit more than the 4K 70mm, but my experience with the film is pretty much exactly the same. I felt the exact way during my second viewing of the film as I did my first. Nothing changed for me. I still feel like the characters are paper thin, the film leans into its amazing visuals for most of the film's themes, and there's a lot of moments that it really works, but there's nothing really here that I feel like I latched onto besides the first half of the film or so. I really do feel like when the act with Howl comes into play, it really brings the film for me to a grinding halt, trying to present its conclusions to the film's themes that felt pretty underwhelming. The exploration of humanity, life, and technology starts off with so much intrigue, but that interest becomes fleeting as the exploration turns more into a stalemate of shallow conclusions that honestly makes the film super forgettable to me. If the film didn't have such a strong presentation visually and musically, then for me it would have been super forgettable. And still, even though this might be my least favorite Kubrick I've seen so far, I can understand completely why people would love this film, and maybe I'm just kind of missing the big picture on this one, but for right now, I think I'm just going to stick with a 6 out of 10 for this one. I really do enjoy both Clash of the Titans and Wrath of the Titans from 2010 as fun, large-scale popcorn schlock, but I've never seen the original Clash of Titans from 1981, but I did end up finding a copy of this at a yard sale for 50 cents, and let me just say, why did we ever change from this DVD case? This case is so cool and it's so much more superior than the plastic cases. The film follows Perseus after being set out to sea to die as a baby with his mother, Zeus being in love with Perseus's mom, and Perseus being Zeus's little demigod baby. He spares them and wipes out the king of Argos, with the Kraken. When sea goddess Thetis, I don't know if I'm going to say these names right, there are some wackadoo names, so just bear with me. I think if I say it with enough confidence and with my chest, I think y'all believe me, right? When sea goddess Thetis' son Calibos gets denied by Zeus to marry the princess and is turned deformed, Thetis won't let anyone have the princess. When Perseus hears that the princess Andromeda's plight, he beats Calibos and takes Andromeda's hand in engagement, not that hand. When Andromeda's mother compares her beauty to that of Thetis, this enrages the god and apparently gives her justification to have Andromeda sacrificed to the Kraken or destroy the entire city. Perseus and the crew come up with a way to kill the Kraken with Medusa's head and sets out on his journey. This film was so much fun. The film's practical effects are the work of Ray Harryhausen, and while yes, they look really goofy by today's standards, this to me is a part of movie magic that I honestly wish was still around today. The mixture of animation and effects can be a little jarring at first, but also feel really innovative in a very special way. This film being from 1981, and I have a feeling that even back then the effects probably came off a little quirky, but looking at it in 2024, it just makes me wish for more of this. Comparing this film to the 2010 film, I prefer the effects of the 81 film. Outside of that, this is just a really fun, really cheesy hero's tale steeped in Greek mythology and fantasy that is a great way to eat popcorn and kill 2 hours quickly. Laurence Olivier as Zeus, Maggie Smith as Thetis, Neil McCarthy as Calibos, and Harry Hamlin as Perseus just feels like a killer cast. Now, as much as I think the film is fun, this also bores some issues that I think really reflects my rating. First off, the score in this film is super boring and lackluster for such an epic scope of a film. The narrative is filled with plot conveniences that take away a lot of the tension in some scenes. Perseus feels invincible in a lot of ways. That also kind of takes away from some of that thrill of those action pieces. And the Greek gods could have been used a little bit more, giving them a little bit more screen time to cement the narrative. The corny dialogue scenes mixed with the visual effects and fun action scenes are really kind of what pulls this film together as a really enjoyable watch that's here more as a spectacle and not much outside of that. It's a spectacle that I appreciate, but I do wish for this grand journey that we would have got more dimensional characters and more stakes, but it's still worth a hearty recommendation. I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. Pandorum from 2009 is directed by Christian Alvrat and stars Dennis Quaid, Ben Foster, and Ant J. Trow. That is a hard name for me to say. Years into the future, as life on Earth is beginning to die, with signs of life on Tanis, a large spaceship called the Elysium, not that movie, is carrying a large passenger base to begin settlement on Tanis. When Bauer, played by Ben Foster, wakes up unexpectedly from cryo, things seem to have gone awry upon the ship. When Peyton, played by Dennis Quaid, wakes up as well, they begin to try to figure out what's going on until they stumble across the extreme horrors on the ship. Pandorum is one of those movies that's been on my watch list pretty much since it came out. For some reason or another, I didn't get to catch this one in theaters, maybe because of its poor box office performance. My local theater didn't keep it long, but it's one of them that's just always kind of been lingering around my orbit of my watch list ever since. I've heard good things about the movie despite its low critical reception. I remember finding a Blu-ray somewhere for cheap. I can't really remember where exactly, but it was pretty cheap and it's been sitting on my shelves pretty much ever since. Well, after watching it, I had a really good time with this one despite some glaring issues I have with the film. First off, I love the look of the film. Everything here visually just works really well. From the great set designs to costumes, the maze of the ship, that really did leave a pit in my stomach whenever the crew would turn the corner, as you had no idea what would be around that corner. The lighting absolutely helps cement the tone of the film. The choice to just use flashlights or glow sticks as the source of light not only looks amazing, but drowns the film in a darkness that makes you nervous as the crew dives deeper into the ship. The frantic and energetic cinematography helps build a sense of claustrophobia and distortion, but without a doubt the best and most stunning part of the production is the villains in the film. I don't want to spoil the film, but what is happening on the ship is a genuine threat, and every time they're on screen, it sends a rush of adrenaline through you because not only is it insanely well designed with great makeup and costumes, but also because of just how savage they are, it feels like a real danger on screen. I personally think Ben Foster and Dennis Quaid do amazing jobs here. Dennis Quaid, in a way, kind of feels like a Harrison Ford performance, but I will say that Ant J. Trow was absolutely terrible throughout the entire time she was on screen. She had no emotions, every line of dialogue was stiff and felt like she was just reading off the page. She had no chemistry with Ben Foster on the screen, which really hurts the climax of the film in my opinion. Even when it comes down to the action set pieces, I felt like the quick cutting and jarry camera work was more or less here just to help cover up what felt like really stiff choreography, despite her character being like the femme fatale tao of the film. Another thing I really loved about the film was the sound design. The music is mostly forgettable, and yes, they do the loud noise thing scares you, but they also play with the sound design to set up the atmosphere in the ship and the villains of the ship that sound fierce and realistic, considering, you know, space horror movie. My biggest complaint comes from the ending twist of the film. You could see it coming from a mile away, and I was really hoping they wouldn't go there with it, but guess what? They did, and I think it honestly takes a lot away from the plot. The film does such a great job at its exposition by giving the characters some cryo memory lapses, putting you, the audience, in the same seat as the characters. The film does a great job of slow dripping you information because you learn it with the characters, and the same goes for the big exposition dumps. That works great to set up the big plot twist. However, when the actual plot twist happens, I feel like there's a disconnect with the characters that takes them from learning organically in the environment to now just being plot devices for the film to reach its climax, without it really feeling like a natural progression of the characters or the story. The film does a lot of great things here, and we honestly don't get to see a lot of films like this where you get to have a great blend of horror, sci-fi, and action, and it all actually kind of comes together. I just wish the film had a stronger ending, but I'd definitely be down to give this one another watch, and I could easily see this one pop up in my horror rotation, and I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. It could go up on a second watch. I doubt it would go down, but a 6 out of 10. I'm not gonna lie to you and tell you that I was super excited when Britt was pulled for this year's 31 for 31. This is a film that I only bought because I found it for $1 at a flea market, and it's a Cohen Media release. The premise of a 63-year-old housewife who is obsessed with cleaning finds out that her husband is cheating on her, which causes her to leave him and move into the small town Borg to teach a youth soccer team without knowing anything about soccer. Didn't really sound like something that I would be all over. But you know what? This just goes to show you that sometimes stepping into a genre or subject that really isn't your thing can be a real treat, because Britt is Here is a heartwarming little comedy with a lot of spirit that is infectious not to feel a sense of comfort from. Pernilla August, who plays Britt absolutely carries the film and gives an outstanding performance. Every minute detail in her facial expressions gives the weight of what's going on in Britt head. You can see her processing and internalizing every piece of new information, which also carries the baggage of not really wanting to move on. The careful balance of telling the audience everything without forcing it down your throats. The cinematography is absolutely great throughout the film. This is not a film that's going to give you like these stunning, beautiful shots, but rather a great example of simple but yet very effective framing and blocking with great lighting and coloring. It's simple in its nature, but it's also very neat and clean to complement the main character. It's impossible to watch this film and not feel for Britt, a woman whose past trauma has kept a weight on her life. To watch her break away from that and become a person of her own ambition, that led to a very heartwarming ending. Each character, even down to the kids on the team, feels believable. This feels like a real town. There's a real sense of community, and Britt, much like the audience, feels like the outsider coming in that eventually becomes a part of that community. The score of the film also adds to the tonal charm and emotional weight, as it carefully helps balance the film with using some folk sounds that adds to the world of this small town. Sure, there's some built-in conflicts that felt a little underbaked or forced, but when the film just gives you Britt taking it one day at a time, that's when the film really hits its stride in character growth and its stride in a viewer experience. Does the forced, oh, she doesn't actually know anything about soccer, so the youth center and the whole conflict, and I'm not trying to spoil anything, is really just put here to launch us into the final act, kind of eye-rolling and predictable and forceful? Yes. But is it still worth a watch and definitely came as a surprise? Yes. Britt is a pretty awesome, lighthearted movie that I feel like you could be in any mood and watch it and enjoy it, and I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. The Beastmaster is honestly a movie I've only heard about because of Vinegar Syndrome releasing it, but with its raving Metacritic of 18, I was pretty hesitant about picking up that Vinegar Syndrome price. Thankfully, not long after seeing Vinegar Syndrome releasing it, I found a DVD copy at a yard sale for 50 cents. The film was released in 1982 and is directed and co-written by Don Coscarelli, who is probably most notable for Phantasm, a film that could have been picked this year, but I've seen both Bubba Hotep and John Dies at the End, and I thought both of those films were pretty enjoyable, and I think The Beastmaster is pretty enjoyable as well. well. The film follows Dar, who can communicate with animals. At the beginning of the film, Max, our villain of the film, gets told by these oracles that King Zed's child will kill him. So Max wants to sacrifice children to help please the gods, but obviously wants to sacrifice Zed's child. And Zed's like, oh hell nah, and banishes Max. When Max has a witch replace Zed's baby and his pregnant wife with a cow, Zed's wife dies. The witch takes the cow baby, tries to get Zed's real son, but a passerby kills the witch and raises the boy. That boy being Dar, and now he can communicate with animals. Well, Dar's village gets attacked by Max's clan, and thanks to his puppy friend, Dar lives. No, not the puppy friend! Dar seeks out for revenge, along the way meeting some animal friends, the cutest pair of ferrets, a panther, and a woman he wants to save, and 2 other strangers who join his cause to take down Max. 10 out of 10 for the snoot kisses. That's adorable. Honestly, this movie is pretty fun to watch, but it's not a great movie by any means. This is a massive plot with very little character development or world building. The acting is very stiff with some really bad ADR. There's moments that also makes me kind of question the safety of the animals on set, which is not great. The makeup is so corny, and so is all of the dialogue, but there's a certain charm to this film that is undeniable. The film is packed with action, jumping from place to place with some solid pacing. The use of real animals does make for some really interesting on-screen moments. The ferrets steal the show for sure. The idea of the story is good enough that it does carry the weaker elements of the story's development. The Beastmaster using his beast for justice is a fun way to take on the hero story, even if every other element is super generic. The film kind of looks super weird, like everything was filmed on a telephoto lens and has some poor shot composition, but it's never like super distracting or like takes away from the popcorn schlock of the story. This isn't one of the movies that's really a good movie by any means, but it doesn't make it a bad watch either. There's a lot of enjoyment here as a pretty basic romp that I did enjoy quite a bit. I would watch this one again for sure. It would be funner to watch it with a group of people to kind of poke fun at it. It's a film that doesn't stand out too much in the bulk of films like this, but it's not bland enough either to be completely forgettable, or not to make it worth a watch in the first place. It's a 5 out of 10 for me, not because it's kind of down the middle, but because it's more enjoyable than the 3 out of 10 production that it basically is. So yeah, it's a 5 out of 10 for me. Minority Report is one of those early 2000s sci-fi films that I've been meaning to get to for a long time, especially being a fan of something like Psycho-Pass. The film is directed by Steven Spielberg and stars Tom Cruise as John Anderton, a chief of police for the Pre-Crime Department, which is a law enforcement department that uses precogs. These are 3 people that can see future crimes. They use this as evidence to arrest people before they commit those crimes, until Colin Farrell's character Danny Witter shows up as an investigator for the Attorney General who wants to investigate the Pre-Crime Department, kind of like an audit. Well, guess what? John Anderton's name is slated to be the next killer by the precogs. Feeling that he was set up, you guessed it, Tom Cruise goes a-running. The film presents a lot of themes of morality if it's driven by character or fate, how you can potentially change your own fate, or maybe you're just destined on a preset path. Themes of being driven by guilt and holding on to that grief that can lead to your own destruction if you let it. And there's a lot of complex themes that you can think about here, but the film doesn't really care to explore those super much, but instead kind of rather wants to focus on the conspiracy crime mystery front and center. It gives you enough bread to make you feel like the film is larger in scale and idea without having to spend a ton of time on the minutia. Yes, I do wish the film would have explored those themes a little more, but it's kind of used as a nice level of spice to pump up the narrative that does feel full circle without harking on the grief of John Anderton. The film is vast with sci-fi concepts that's devoid of our world but feels natural in the world it's set in. Again, without wasting a ton of time on it, just go with it. For a film that's over 2 hours long, there really isn't any fat here, which made the runtime fly by. Sure, the CG is very dated, but knowing this is from the early 2000s, it's still pretty impressive. The world isn't as stylized as something like Blade Runner, but it does have a character of its own and lends itself to enrich the story. Anderton is trying to prove his innocence, but is he going to fall into a predetermined destiny? It's a fascinating conundrum for the main character to have, and it makes for a pretty thrilling watch. You want to know what his character does next and how he may be able to break out of this cycle. The film is trying to be a dark and gritty detective story that unfortunately packs some of Spielberg's cornball nature into some of the action set pieces that feels pretty tonally imbalanced. Spielberg can do dark and hold that tone, but too much of his Indiana Jones kind of comes through here in the action set pieces that makes them honestly some of the worst parts of the movie, especially this jetpack scene. If the whole film kind of had this popcorny vibe to it, then it would mesh, but the entire film is presented as a very dark, gritty, and conspiracy conspiratorial thriller that having moments like this is just kind of eye-rolling and honestly brought the film down quite a bit for me. I still think that this film is pretty awesome though, with a great cast and honestly some really intriguing story moments that I wasn't really quite sure who the villain was. That at the big surprise kind of made me feel like I probably should have seen that coming. This is one that definitely is worth checking out and one I'll be watching again at some point. It's one that could go up on a second viewing, but it could go down on a second viewing. But for now, I'm giving this one a 7.5 out of 10. Mother is a film directed by Bong Joon-ho from 2009. Bong Joon-ho being one of my favorite directors, as he just never really misses, and personally, Mother might be one of my favorites from him. I picked up the Blu-ray a long time ago because I've always heard good things about it, and being a fan of Bong Joon-ho, I really probably shouldn't have waited this long to check it out, which I'm kind of sitting in the same boat as, his debut Barking Dogs Never Bite, which was also a contender to be pulled this year. Mother is the story of a mother who lives pretty much a normal life with her 28-year-old son who clearly has some mental problems. We see very early on that her son isn't capable of putting together his own thoughts and acts very immature for his age. Him and his friend Jin Tae get into some trouble at a local golf course, which Do Jun, the mother's son, gets scolded by his mother for hanging out with that rapscallion. Well, eventually Do Jun goes out drinking, and walking home he notices a young girl, as we cut to the next day to find out that that young girl is dead, with eyewitnesses spotting Do Jun walking behind her in a golf ball with his name on it at the crime scene. He is charged with her murder. Shocked, the mother can't believe this and fights to prove her son's innocence. You want to talk about an absolutely thrilling mystery, this is it. I genuinely could not predict how the film was going to end, and the more and more you uncover about the murder, the mother, and the son, along with the orbiting people of the story, the film gets darker and darker and reaches a rather disturbing truth that I haven't stopped thinking about since watching it. I really want to talk about spoilers. I really do, but I'm not going to. There's just certain moments that when the truth is revealed, it will literally change your entire perspective of the film and its characters, and it does that like 4 times through the runtime. This is definitely a film that I think multiple viewings would make you look at different clues in a different way, and honestly, I can't wait to rewatch this one. The performances are great from the entire cast, but Kim Hae, who plays the mother, gives a performance that should be on the table of the best performances of all time. She can hide subtle moments in her facial expressions, but can also sell the large outburst moments, but the desperation of the character leaks through every fiber of her performance that honestly really sells the entire film. The film looks beautiful as the cinematography is top notch, the score fits the moody atmosphere and tone shifts very nicely. This is a film that I would have a lot more to talk about if I was going to spoil the film, but I really want to keep films in this series spoiler free. But I feel like most of why I think this film is so masterfully done is because of the spoiler moments when you learn about the characters and the real situation happening. It just adds so much depth to the narrative and its characters. This is just a film that kept me glued to the screen and completely engaged the entire time as it kept unraveling the truth. Bong Joon-ho is one of my favorite filmmakers for a reason, and I think Mother might be one of his best, and I'm giving this one a 9 out of 10. Could go up on a second watch. I highly doubt it would go down. Border is a film that I've wanted to watch since its release in 2018, but never got it anywhere near us, and I finally found the Blu-ray. This is one I actually wanted to watch before 31 for 31, but ended up not watching it, but now we finally did. The film is directed by Ali Abbasi, which 2 of his feature follow-ups, Holy Spider and The Apprentice, are both on my watch list, and he also directed 2 episodes of The Last of Us, which is, surprise surprise, also on my watch list. Border, however, follows Tina, played by Eva Melander, a rather unusual looking person who is a customs officer, which, thanks to her unique ability to smell certain things and emotions, helps stop smugglers from bringing in contraband. She is in a loveless marriage, struggling with her self-worth and identity, when a strange person shows up at the border that looks strangely like her. Infatuated with this stranger, she begins to discover herself in a pretty truly one-of-a-kind film. The film presents this rather crazy and strange story, but plays it so close to the ground and straightforward that it becomes not only incredibly believable in its world, but also very emotionally strung together. Eva Melander brings such such a deep and complex performance as Tina that it's just impossible not to care about her character, and honestly, as a standout performance, she really sells the film. Another massive standout is the makeup, which did earn the film a rightful Oscar nomination, and the prosthetics of the film are just absolutely incredible. The film does present a nice mystery wrapped in this coming of age style film. I guess it's not really a coming of age, but rather a coming of personhood, but yeah, I mean, you get the point. However, when the film presents itself in such a grounded way, the last act of the film really kind of goes a little bit off the deep end. That really left me wishing it didn't go this route. It did take me out of the experience. Not only did I feel like it was completely unnecessary addition of drama for the story, but it also felt unfortunately very predictable. I remember leading into the last act thinking, I really hope they don't go down this path, and it did, which really felt to undermine Tina a bit as a character. Sure, she kind of got her footing at the end with her character arc, but still it kind of took away from me in the whole experience. Maybe that's something that on a second viewing wouldn't be as distracting. There's a lot here that the film explores with its themes of humanity that leave a lot to still chew on after the fact. That's a nice takeaway. This is one that I could see people being kind of turned off just because of its premise and presentation, but I really implore that you go check this one out because it's a rather unique and very well put together film, especially on the technical side, that I feel like says quite a bit about individualism. I also feel like I say this quite a bit, but it's one that could go up on a second viewing, and I'm currently going to give this one a 7.5 out of 10. In Time. Every time I think about that title, all I can think about is that scene from The Punisher.
You are one dumb son of a bring a knife to a gunfight.
In Time is written and directed by Andrew Niccol, where your life is your currency after everybody stops aging at 25 years old. Basically, you could be immortal if you're rich enough, and the lower class kind of live paycheck to paycheck or minute to minute. As your time runs out, you try to find new ways to get more time, including free clinics that act as kind of like food banks in the world. Concept alone, this is a pretty interesting one, and this is a film that I've always wanted to see. I ended up finding a DVD copy for $1 at a yard sale last summer, so I was happy to finally cross this one off the list. The film stars Justin Timberlake, who plays Will Salas, a hard worker from the slums who is trying to get time for his mother. Both live minute to minute when after his mother passes due to the harsh reality they live in. He ends up meeting a billionaire in this world, a man who can essentially live forever. Well, the man doesn't want to live anymore, so he passes off his fortune to Will. With newfound life, Will decides to head to the rich section of the world. This world is kind of structured like Snowpiercer, but instead of a train, it's more like unlocking the rest of the map in GTA. When he arrives on the scene, it is apparent he doesn't belong here, which launches Cillian Murphy's character, a timekeeper or time cop, who believes Will might have killed the mega rich man for his money. See, it's very easy to steal time in this film. You basically just need to touch somebody's arm and take it from them. While on the rich side, Will meets Sylvia, played by Amanda Seyfried, who is the daughter of a mega wealthy man. When the two hit it off, when Will is finally questioned about his time, he kidnaps Sylvia and the two go on the run with time running out. The film actually does a great job at the small details, things like the fact that Will eats faster than everybody else because he normally doesn't have enough time to enjoy it. The way the world is set up between the different classes and the way the world kind of works feels very detailed. However, I kind of think the film somewhat gets lost in those details because the narrative of the film is incredibly predictable, cliched, and for the most part, pretty boring. This is an hour and 50-minute movie where the pacing feels like a roller coaster and not a good one. You click up the hill with a lackluster love plot, only to drop down to a mediocre hill that the action is kind of these cat and mouse chase scenes. The film presents some really interesting concepts, but that's like the first 5 minutes of the film, and the film doesn't really explore those concepts outside of the surface level. The film presents themes of classism, but doesn't really say anything new. It's the same message, but presented in a new box. The detail to have the color grading between the sterile rich worlds, where the film is contrasted as kind of a lifeless to oversaturated in the slums, is a nice visual tie, but again, it's kind of just the small details that add a bit of sparkle to the dull narrative that I just couldn't get into. Maybe if the narrative was as well thought out as all the minutia, this would have been a really great film, but for now it's going to be a 3 out of 10. Chaplin is a biopic about Charlie Chaplin, the pioneer of silent filmmaking that captured Hollywood in a whirlwind and has become one of the largest names in film history. A ton of his films have been put out by the Criterion Collection. While I've only seen a handful and really need to watch more of his work, Chaplin is a film that I've always wanted to see for quite a while. The film stars Robert Downey Jr. as Chaplin and got him an Oscar nomination for the role, and I personally really like Robert Downey Jr. when he's acting and not just Tony Starking. Honestly though, I think RDJ is probably the best part of the film. His performance is great and was totally totally worth the nomination. I'm not sure what else was nominated that year, but his performance was fantastic. The film was released in 1992 and was directed by Richard Attenborough, as it follows the life of Charles Chaplin from a young age with his mentally ill mother, played by Charlie Chaplin's real-life daughter, up until he got into vaudeville, which sent him to Hollywood to make movies. The film pretty much goes from the beginning to the end of his film career, ending the film on a celebration of Charlie Chaplin's work, which honestly is one of my favorite scenes in the film. However, the film has a center narrative piece with Anthony Hopkins as him and an older Charlie Chaplin talk about his autobiography and setting the record straight. This is used as a way to help transition from period to period that worked really well. I've heard that this is really one of the only made up parts for the film, but as a story structure it helped work really well. The problem that I have with the film is that outside of some of the shining moments, this is a super bland, cliched, and by the numbers biopic about a very interesting figure. I felt like the film could have used some more stylistic choices in its presentation to kind of help tell that story, but everything's just so by the numbers that it really let some moments drag on in its nearly 2.5-hour runtime. And despite that runtime, the film can completely just gloss over some of the dramatic moments in Chaplin's life to instead fixate on some of the minutia. Not to mention how kind of creepy Chaplin is with younger women, and the film still kind of plays it off like, what a scamp. And it kind of as a celebration when knowing that he's been with some questionably young women. I say questionable because age of consent laws were weird back in the day. It's still pretty off-putting for the most part, like he's kind of a creep. I feel like the film will present some criticisms toward Chaplin's life and his character, but then like on the other hand kind of wave it off, like the fact that he ran through wires faster than Usain Bolt, but because he was so fixed on his work, and it's like, you know, he's an artist, he's fixated on his art, look how great his art is though, you know what I mean? See, it's kind of worth it. It's kind of worth neglecting his loved ones. With all that being said, I think if you're a big fan of Chaplin, then this is totally worth watching for Robert Downey Jr.'s performance alone. And while I do think the film is a very generic biopic, it's still a pretty decent experience as a whole, and it's kind of an easy recommendation for a lot of people because it is pretty digestible. But I think I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. I just kind of wished they would have done a little bit more flair to it, kind of use some of the like Chaplinisms as some backing for like stylistic choices of the film to kind of make it pop a little more, but 6 out of 10. Battle Rocket is Wes Anderson's directorial debut and the last Wes Anderson film I haven't seen yet. Actually, scratch that, I haven't watched Asteroid City yet. Released in 1996, the film is the feature-length version of the short film released in 1993 that really started Anderson's career, along with also starting Luke and Owen Wilson's career. The short film is a decent short film that showcases some of the early stylings of Anderson, but also really showcases the acting strengths of the Wilson brothers in its 13-minute runtime. It's a nice little watch that shows where it all started, but flash forward to 1996 and the full feature version of Bottle Rocket stands on its own. The film follows the same plot lines as the short film, but expands on it and goes further than the short. Anthony, played by Luke Wilson, and Dignan, played by Owen Wilson, are friends when Anthony is released from a mental hospital and Dignan wants to plan a massive robbery. They loop Bob Mapplethorpe, played by Robert Musgrave, into the plan as the three plan the massive robbery of a bookstore to lay low and the escape afterwards. This is a film where the plot itself is the joke. They rob a bookstore, and in doing so they make off with a little bit of money despite treating it like a massive bank robbery success. Dignan wants to follow these acts up with a set of rules he's imposed, but only because he wants to prove himself as somebody who is more competent than he really is. Anthony is more along just here for the ride, who's Dignan's friend, but ends up madly in love with the motel's cleaning lady that they're staying low in, this causing a rift between the two. And Bob Mapplethorpe is just Bob. But seriously, the three have amazing on-screen chemistry, and the three add a lot of depth to their characters that really help carry some of the long middle sections of the film where I felt that the film wasn't entirely sure of like what to do. Looking at Wes Anderson's other films, the films are usually very tight narratively, but Bottle Rocket does have some moments of kind of spinning its wheels. This also feels like the least Anderson movie of his filmography, as if you were to tell me like this might have been a Coen's brother movie instead, I probably would have believed you. That's not to say Anderson personally isn't here in the film, because he is. The symmetry, color palettes, and quirky light and hearted tone is here, but you can tell it's not fully developed like it is today. If you're a fan of Wes Anderson and haven't seen Bottle Rocket, then it's totally worth checking out to see where the director started. Even if you're not really a fan of Anderson, I still think the film is worth checking out as just a comedy, because on its own, the film does have a lot of fun moments and heart to its characters that does make it a pretty enjoyable experience. And I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10, which is also the same rating I would give the short film as well. Dementia 13 is Francis Ford Coppola's directorial debut, and I picked up the Vestron video release of the film, and honestly, I really didn't like this one. The film is about a widow who goes to her husband's family's mega estate on the guise that her husband is still alive. She wants to use some of that sweet, sweet silver spoon, baby. Also there are her two brother-in-laws and one of their wives, Cain. When the widow sees how she can manipulate the mother of the family centered around her dead daughter, well, let's just say she gets the axe from the family. When people go missing and strange things begin to happen, a doctor begins to investigate, which boils down to exactly what I thought was going on. The film is wickedly predictable without having any real scares or hook to kind of hold you in. Each character is so one-dimensional. The film doesn't have any flair in the visual to help build the atmosphere. This is a super bland and forgettable 75-minute runtime feature. I felt every second of that too just drag on as the film just tries to figure out a way to hit that runtime. The film did kind of start off rather strong for me. I genuinely loved the opening scene and the character Louise, the widow. Louise, who is the only character that felt fleshed out and felt like they had a real purpose in the story. You know, her conniving ways led to some really interesting ideas, but unfortunately, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1, they kill her off like within the first 20 minutes. Like they kill her off super quick, and the rest of the film is just completely devoid of any complexity or conflict, or they're just focusing on the story around one bland dimensional character of Cain that added absolutely nothing. Luis was the standout, and that's what kept me hooked in the story because it was presenting a lot of fun and interesting story paths that just completely go nowhere now. The mystery of who the killer is an obvious one once the film states that, hey, there's a killer here. From here, the film does nothing to deviate from that, which makes the film just drag on and on and on and on. You can develop a real sense of dread even if you know what's going on by forcing you to watch these horrific things or things like that, but that's not how this film goes about it. The film tries to play it off like a plot twist, which was so obvious that it just makes everything so boring. Honestly, I didn't go into this one with much expectations. I really think Francis Ford Coppola kind of sucks as a director. He has some great masterful movies, but they seem more like flukes than the consistency. And I'm giving this one a 3 out of 10, and this one sucked. Dragonslayer might be my number one of this year for the artwork, as the artwork to this release is beautifully stunning. I'm a huge fan of fantasy movies and sword and sorcery kind of worlds, so Dragonslayer has always kind of been on my watch list. Well, I came across the Blu-ray 4K Steelbook and picked it up, not realizing that it's a one-disc set with no regular Blu-ray. And at the time of buying this, I didn't have a 4K player, but I do now. The film was released in 1981 and directed by Matthew Robbins, who is a frequent collaborator with Guillermo del Toro, so you might have an idea of what you're walking into this with. The film follows Galen, a sorcerer's apprentice. When the sorcerer accepts to slay a dragon of a kingdom, that kingdom, their king, had made a deal with the dragon to sacrifice girls to spare that kingdom from Valerian and her cohorts that want to stop this dragon. When the sorcerer is killed, Galen steps in to slay the dragon despite his flundering magical skills. This is an epic action adventure that has a super awesome dragon in it. Sure, some of the dialogue can be super cheesy. The love angle is predictable, forced, and very cheesy, but when everything leads to that climactic showdown with the dragon, the entire film is worth it because it is amazing. Sure, the rest of the film leading up to it is fun as well. A decent cast of characters mixed with some political corruption and a becoming of age into power hero journey is easy to digest, but that last act is just so awesome and makes the entire film worth watching on its own. There's a lot of really cool puppetry, animatronics, and stop motion being used to blend together, and it looks dated, yes, but it also looks completely timeless as well. It's just something that is like a product of this era that is pretty much the same thing I said about Clash of the Titans. It's just awesome, and I wish I could see more of this visual style. It's epic and exhilarating and ties the whole experience together. I do wish we would have set up Galen and Valerian's love plot a little bit more, kind of developed that a little bit further, and I do wish we could have explored more of like Galen trying to get better and better as well. Galen's improvements comes only at like plot momentum, and the same kind of goes for his love of Valerian. It doesn't really feel organic to the characters. I do think what ends up happening with the princess is kind of funny in context, but I wish we could have explored the kingdom maybe a little bit more, or maybe we could have just sidestepped all that to just focus on the journey more. There's a lot of little grape seeds that they put out there, but they don't really like let it fully ripen. It should be said that we do learn more about Valerian, her character, and she definitely has more depth than our main character Galen, so you know, the side character is kind of, you know, more complex than our hero. Still though, this is one of those movies series, I could move into the category of like comfort movie, where it's a lot of fun and such an easy watch that packs a lot of spectacle that I could easily just rewatch this one, and would definitely recommend to pretty much anybody if you haven't seen this one. And I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. It potentially could go up on a second viewing, but I highly doubt it would go down. I just really enjoyed this one. It was a lot of fun. Fando y Lis, or Fando y Lis, is the directorial debut of Alejandro Jodorowsky, a director that I really admire and I would really like to see his full filmography. Fando y Lis being his debut is a really interesting starting point for the enigmatic director, and it's a pretty uncompromising film. This isn't exactly an easy watch. The film is set in a weird post-apocalyptic world where Fando and his partially paralyzed fiancée Lis are in search of a magical city and an oasis called Tar, and no, not that one. Along the way, the couple run into weird groups of people, and the film feels very stringed together without much cohesion. The film is based on the memories Jodorowsky had of a play by the surrealist Fernando Arrabal. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, that last name right, but going into the film without a script, it does kind of show that. The film feels pretty much like everything is left open to the viewer's interpretations as you bounce around from scene to scene, wandering this wasteland like the characters. Each set piece you could dig some kind of deeper meaning out of it, kind of really dig into its symbolism, but I don't really think it compounds into anything like cement for the film as a whole. Each section feels more like vignettes that are strung together by the journey and the main characters, which is very loosely tied together, which did make the runtime feel much longer than it really should have. Sure, it could be a fun watch to watch the film with a buddy where you guys kind of just sit back and pick apart the interpretations you both have from moment to moment, but that symbolism doesn't feel as grandiose as something like The Holy Mountain, which is a film I really need to rewatch, or Santa Sangre, where the symbolism there kind of adds to the characters in the world and the spirit of the film. Here, the symbolism feels kind of like the main dish rather than the secret ingredient. There are some really striking visuals throughout the entire film. You can really see where Jodorowsky's visual flair and production shines, as it's easily the strongest aspect of the film. There's so many cool shots that would make for great posters throughout the entire film, but all that is just kind of backed up by some really bad and cheap sound design that was constantly distracting. I understand that this was a pretty low budget film, but I've always heard that audio can make or break a film, and it's definitely a big distraction here. The performances are fine, but there's not much for them to kind of work with, as there really isn't much to perform besides some of the theatrics that are more or less here to bulk up the visuals. Ultimately, so far, this is probably my least favorite Jodorowsky film that I've seen, but I haven't seen too many of them yet. I would definitely be down to watch this film again for a third time. My second watch I did with the director's commentary, which was a lot of fun, but I think I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. And funny enough, this is kind of the least I have to say about a Jodorowsky film I've seen. Attached to this DVD, though, was a documentary in 1994 called La Constellation Jodorowsky, and it was honestly super disappointing. The film sets up to explore the life and art of Jodorowsky, but quickly feels like it kind of gets lost in anecdotes and a speaking event where Jodorowsky performs an exercise. After watching the documentary, I honestly felt like I didn't really learn anything new that Jodorowsky's Dune didn't really cover, which that movie also had much better visuals. Definitely would recommend Jodorowsky's Dune over this. The entire documentary feels like the most basic point-and-shoot camera setup, which is kind of odd to capture one of the most visually interesting filmmakers of all time. The film really meanders and feels like it's bulked up for runtime, but when I checked out the director's commentary for Fando y Lis, I was surprised to not only learn about Fando y Lis, but also about Jodorowsky in a much more entertaining and informational way than the documentary presented. And it's also pretty much packed with the exact same information that the documentary presents, minus this weird art performance exercise that he does throughout majority of the runtime of this documentary that's just cut out of there, which I thought was the worst part of the documentary. To me personally, the director's commentary for Fando y Lis honestly just replaces the need for La Constellation Jodorowsky completely. It's a nice bonus to have on disc, sure, but I'm never going to watch this documentary again, nor would I really recommend it. I'd recommend just the audio commentary or Jodorowsky's Dune. So I'm going to give La Constellation Jodorowsky a 5 out of 10. I'm much closer to a 4, but I guess like if you really wanted to, like, it does kind of serve some kind of purpose for Jodorowsky, I guess. I don't know. It's closer to a 4 than a 6, but a 5 out of 10. Bye. Batman vs. Robin, a part of the DC animated lineup, something that time and time again has shown that is much better than their live-action counterparts, and trust me, Batman vs. Robin keeps that going. Released in 2015 as a sequel to Son of Batman and followed up by Batman Bad Blood and Batman Hush, we followed Batman and Damian as Robin, as they take down the Dollmaker, a rather creepy entry into the Gotham Rogue Gallery, but presented with kind of fighting between justice over vengeance. Robin backs off the Dollmaker when suddenly Talon shows up and straight up rips the dude's heart out. Talon is a mercenary for the Court of Owls and forms a bond with Robin. Conflicted with himself, it only drives a further wedge between him and Batman that Talon is more than willing to take a sledgehammer to, all while the Court of Owls is courting Bruce Wayne. First off, I want to say that even though this is the second film and technically a 4-film series, you don't need to watch any of them. You can just watch them on their own. They're completely self-contained. Sure, there's some slight continuity that kind of, ties them together a little bit, but you can just watch this on its own. Batman vs. Robin is the only one of the 4 I hadn't seen until today, and honestly, it wasn't until writing this review that I even found out that it was supposed to be a sequel. Although I would personally say each one of these 4 films is totally worth watching, but I honestly have to say I think Batman vs. Robin is my favorite of the 4. The animation is great, it's before the art direction of the newer films, the action is handled really well with some great choreography and has some really pounding moments. The score leans a bit more into the horror tone that I like to help push some of the darker tone of the film, and honestly the film had a great opening that really set the mood and what the conflict was going to be. One of the real standouts for the film for me was the relationship you see on screen between Batman, the Bruce Wayne, and Robin, his son Damian Wayne. Bruce Wayne, who isn't used to being a father, and Damian, who isn't used to having one, are always butting heads, which honestly feels completely organic to their relationship as you watch both of these characters try to navigate this new relationship. This allowing our villain Talon to play a pretty interesting role as a potential new father figure for Robin. Robin is trying to find himself, but he's unable to think for himself, so he desperately wants somebody to give him the answers, but he only wants the answers he wants to hear, which is what makes this daddy triangle a really interesting one to watch on screen. It's also a great way to add a lot of depth and complexity to Batman without honestly having to rely on the villain. The true conflict of the film is at the home front, despite the brewing evil in the background. With that being said, I love the Court of Owls in this film, and I wish we would have got more of them. Having a secret Illuminati-style society within Gotham is a really fascinating one that was building a lot of potential as they were trying to infiltrate Bruce Wayne. However, the Court of Owls is almost kind of completely scrapped in the way for Talon, and honestly, it kind of worked. Talon is just kind of an unpredictable and ruthless villain that's also really kind of easy to understand his motivations and his past. The way he is with Robin and a reflection of his own past makes him a really interesting and honestly a pretty underrated villain in my opinion. Yes, I would have liked to see more of the Court of the Owls, but the direction they take with Talon was a great substitution that led to a great ending that I won't spoil. I'm a pretty big fan of the DC animated films, and there's a lot of them out there, but I do feel like Batman vs. Robin is one of them that's definitely worth checking out. While it's action-packed, it also really focuses on its emotional core between Batman and Robin, father and son, and that makes it really stand out as something a little more unique and kind of special for the DC WB animated films that I've seen in the past. And I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. Stalker is a film I've put off, and for no real good reason either. It's a film that I've wanted to see before I even started to dive into Andrei Tarkovsky's films, and really enjoying his work so far. I've always wanted to see it because I've always heard about the hellish production that's around this film. Cinema Tyler has a great video on that, so definitely go check out his video. As for the film itself, it follows a stalker, or basically a guide who takes 2 men into a forbidden zone, where at the center of the zone is a room that will grant your wishes. Along the grueling journey, the almost meditative state that the zone puts the characters in is mimicked by the filmmaking that explores human desires and drive that expands a rather simple and small production to such a profound scale that it's not left me since I've watched this a few months ago at this point. I wanted to watch this film again before writing this review because it's a film that feels like it deserves multiple watches to try and peel back its layers and to fully understand it. On the surface viewing, you'll have a pretty interesting dystopia and a quest to grant wishes, but it can be kind of a challenging viewing annoying at some points with its slow pacing, lingering shots, and slow narrative, but it will still pull you in, and it kind of makes you look at it deeper as the film pushes the characters to think, reflect, and fall apart. It puts the audience in this same set of mind as its characters to create this whirlwind of intrigue covered with this grimy, radiation-filled scum of the zone. But with multiple viewings, I feel like the film will blossom more and more as you explore these themes over and over, reflecting upon these characters, shots, and the natural poetry of its filmmaking to make it even more engaging on multiple viewings. I feel pretty confident in saying that I would probably get more out of this film on a second viewing, even though I haven't done one yet. I wanted to before writing this review, but I just didn't have time. But I will say I haven't stopped thinking about this film either. Since my first viewing, I just kept getting pulled back into thinking about this hellish atmosphere, thinking about not only the production itself, but also thinking about the characters, their drive and desolation of that journey. That makes me think about my own personal drive, desires, and wishes. The film pits its characters against their fears and phobias as a way to challenge them to persevere. Each character is deeply complex, representing different aspects of life and humanity, and as you watch this trio go through this human journey that leads to different paths, you yourself could walk away with different interpretations of the film. Is life a meaningless chore that even if your greatest wishes come true, that it means and changes nothing? That you're just a slave to life with no true free will? Or are you just needing to push yourself to discover what you truly want and to achieve? Or do you want to destroy other people's dreams in order to cash in on your own? Or destroy people's dreams out of your own fears? I feel like it's one of those films that a group of people could walk in to watch and walk out with different meanings and interpretations. I personally found the film to be kind of a balance between pessimistic and optimistic, where these characters have the choice for their own outcomes, that they could either see it or not depending on them individually, and that's kind of like life's purpose. It's kind of what you put into it. It's like one of those coin wishing wells at the mall. Like, I can give it a coin, sure, but it's kind of up to me to choose whether or not if that wish comes true. It's just something that's been on my mind since watching the film, and I haven't quite gotten a solid answer or forgotten about it yet. Outside of the complexity of the story, the film is one of the most beautifully shot films I've ever seen, with honestly a once-in-a-lifetime look that won't be recreated naturally. I mean, it's potentially what killed Tarkovsky and some of the cast. The subtle score isn't very present, but it's there to help build the atmosphere, and the three lead performances are fantastic. Honestly, on a filmmaking scale, this is masterclass filmmaking and proof that Tarkovsky was one of the best. I can't wait to watch the rest of his films, but I think Stalker might be a hard one to beat. I am really excited to watch this one again. It's a film that could go higher on a second viewing, but for now, I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10. It was pretty great. It was amazing. I really enjoyed this one. A 9 out of 10. Starcrash, a movie I've never heard about until a buddy of mine got me a copy for either Christmas or my birthday. I can't remember either way, but thanks, Austin, because this is without a doubt a mega blast to watch. By the way, this is a perfect so bad is good movie. The plot is so convoluted with no time whatsoever to build it in its 92-minute runtime, where an outlaw smuggler and her alien partner are arrested and then recruited by the Emperor of the Galaxy, played by none other than Christopher Plummer, to rescue his son, who is played by none other than David Hasselhoff, and to destroy a weapon that the evil guy of the movie has. Along this path, our team has to fight off the Amazonians' women's and death by Snoo Snoo, wander a frozen planet, and take down Neanderthals. Okay, just look at what our main character wears. You know exactly what kind of movie this is, and you know exactly what you're getting into with this one, and I had a blast with it. First off, the film looks awesome, from its over-the-top production and costume design to its use of miniatures and stop motion animation. It's just a fun film to look at, but when you add characters like Elle, a robot with a thick southern accent, what's not to love? The film literally does nothing to develop its characters, world, or plot, but just throws the characters into wacky situations with some poorly choreographed combat that honestly, I'm just here for. The film doesn't care. It just doesn't care about the plot. It's here to pull you in with the flashy box art to sell itself to you, but it doesn't really care to do anything other than to just kind of be fun. There's almost a feeling of, well, if we're gonna make this, let's at least try to make it watchable along the way. This is a perfect party movie where you just have some drinks, some snackies, and you crack jokes about it the entire time. It's so goofy and over the top that it's charming in its own way that totally makes it worth watching and totally rewatchable as well. Seeing stars like Christopher Plummer and David Hasselhoff in something like this, despite the short runtime they get, is just a lot of fun. The lightsabers in the film does kind of feel like, hey mom, can we get lightsabers? Well, we have lightsabers at home. And honestly, I'm here for this Stars and Stripes Star Wars knockoff, and I'm giving this one a 4 out of 10, baby, but it's like a great 4. Why would you should watch this? Definitely check out Starcrash. It is fun. Bye. Howl from Beyond the Fog is a film I picked up a long time ago because of a buddy's recommendation. The film was released on DVD brand new at Walmart for only $7.96 because the film is a 35-minute short film. However, the film also comes with a 35-minute making of documentary, and honestly, after watching both, I would highly recommend checking out both of them. Watch the film and then just back it up with the making of the film as well. Howl from Beyond the Fog is a short film that uses a mixture of puppets, miniatures, and animation to bring this hulking kaiju to life. The film follows a blind girl who goes to the local pond and befriends the kaiju. Both are seen as monsters when the local developers find out about the monster and want to remove it, leading to the kaiju money moments. The film is just steeped with so much charm that you can easily look past its budgetary shortcomings. My biggest complaint is just not having the film on Blu-ray, since the DVD compression kind of sucks, and I find this film to be very visually interesting considering how they went about making it. My biggest complaint overall with the film, though, funny enough, is the cinematography. Sure, I love the film visually from a production standpoint, but the film relies a little too heavy on camera close-ups to hide its budgetary restrictions, which can lead to some framing and blocking frustrations, as they can kind of feel tonally off because it's shot this way to kind of hide things and not to express emotions or tones. You can get some really awesome shots for sure in this film, but I did find some of it to be kind of building a frustration within me. The score to the film felt pretty generic, but it's serviceable and not distracting, and the same goes for the performances. With puppets, they don't move their mouths, and there are times it can feel a little jumbled on who is actually saying what when there are multiple puppets on screen, but it's not impossible to follow. After watching the film and checking out the behind the scenes short documentary, there's a lot of inspirational things to take away from this film. Just the use of miniatures and costume work, and to see how they pulled it all together is just really fascinating, and it does make me appreciate the film even more. This is a pretty short film for this series, and honestly I wasn't sure if I was going to do it for this series, but I'm glad I did because it's 100% worth checking out. It's a fun little kaiju movie that has a lot of heart and passion behind it, and again, since it is only a 35-minute short film, I super recommend just bulking it together with the behind the scenes documentary that they have attached to this and just watching it as a feature film together. And I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. It could go higher on a second viewing, it could go down, but 7 out of 10 for now, baby. Lars von Trier is a director that I really love and appreciate, but one that I still need to clear out his backlog, or at least a good chunk of his movies before Antichrist. Dogville is von Trier's film from 2003 starring Nicole Kidman and Paul Bettany. I think I'm saying that right. I think the film is still only available on DVD. I'm not sure if there's a Blu-ray, and honestly I don't remember where I got this on DVD, but the film is kind of broken up into multiple chapters about the town of Dogville. First thing you may notice is probably the stage. The entire film is on a soundstage with minimalist decorations. This is the town of Dogville, and this is all you see the entire film. And I don't fully understand how, but you will totally buy into it by the end of the film. And honestly, I kind of forgot you're basically just watching actors on a stage and not like a real town. Like me, I was gonna hop into town and get one of those gooseberry pies, but I guess this isn't even a real town. Anyway, each town member plays a certain role within the town, with a narrator helping to construct the narrative as we go from chapter to chapter, with Paul's character Tom Edison Jr. as kind of the center point. The town is going about their day until one night a mysterious woman named Grace, played by Nicole Kidman, shows up. The town has to decide whether or not to accept her into their town, since she is clearly on the run from something. From here is where the film starts to take form and where the town becomes honestly believable. Now, this is a 3-hour film, but I honestly didn't feel it, and it feels kind of necessary to build these characters. Each character is fully developed, and you fully understand each of these characters and their motivations as the film progresses. This is a character-driven film, and it fully understands that despite the stage location setup. The characters are without a doubt the forefront of the film. Nicole Kidman gives an amazing performance that honestly should have nabbed her another Oscar nomination, if not potentially a win, but every performance here is fantastic across the board. Another shining star of the film is Lars von Trier's direction and visual style. First off, this is just like an insanely impressive technical feat to work within its own framing and selling you it so well, but when you constantly see the background actors, and because there's no walls of separation, they have to perform in a way that's believable to constantly make the town sell the illusion to the film, and there's never really a moment that it doesn't do that. The film feels so meticulous and purposeful that it's hard not to just be in awe of its own construction. Even despite its very limited space and minimum production, the film just looks fantastic, and it uses great lighting and camera work to express different tone shifts, foreshadowing, and adding energy to the film. If you've seen a Von Trier film before, then you know exactly what to kind of expect from the editing and camera work, and Dogville kind of lives up to that standard, while also being very striking and kind of stands out compared to its other brethrens within Von Trier's other work. I also love where the film goes with the climax of the film. Going all in left the film with a really impactful ending that really kind of makes me think about human nature, the greed of the greedy, and the basic human instinct that I honestly wasn't thinking about until the end of the film. This is kind of a weird one because when I finished watching the film, I did really like it and thought this was an easy 8 out of 10. But after thinking about it and sitting down to write this review, I felt more strongly about the film than when I initially watched it. But I think for now, I'm going to stick with that 8 out of 10 rating, but I could easily see a strong potential for this one going up on a second viewing, and honestly, I do really want to watch this one again despite the 3-hour runtime. It's a film that I think is genuinely original, and it has that added spice of Von Trier, which has made him that director's director. I really love this one, and I definitely recommend checking this one out. I'm going to stick currently with an 8 out of 10, but it's probably going to move itself up in the future, and this one was awesome. The Piper is a Korean horror mystery thriller that I picked up while on vacation at McKay's, which is a killer store if you're ever in Knoxville, Tennessee. You're the only 10 I see. I found the film on DVD for either $1.99 or $2.99, I can't remember, but I thought it sounded pretty cool. Well, as I was digging through my tubs of films that I don't have space for on my shelves to get rid of some things, I apparently have already bought the film on DVD a while back. Oops. Well, let's finally watch this accidental double buy. Anybody else ever done that? Like accidentally bought the same movie twice without knowing you did? The Piper follows a father and son on a journey to get to a city to get his son medicine for his cough. Along the way, they stumble into a gated off village where things with the village are just kind of weird. It's got like a weird vibe. It's a weird place. The village chief lets them stay for a little while until the father figures out that the village has a massive, and I mean massive, rat infestation. The father offers up his services of playing his flute or pipe to drive the rats out, along with some powder rat repellents. During his operation, though, he befriends a lot of the villagers that once that was kind of guarded off to him, kind of now see him in high regards, this building a conflict in the village chief that no longer wants him there. I want to start off by saying that the plot description in the DVD cover completely spoils the end of the film. The entire film is centered around the mystery of the village. The description and artwork is literally the last 15 minutes of the film, which if you're going into the film not knowing anything about it, the film builds to this point to not really show or spoil anything. So I do feel like it kind of took away a little bit of the impact of the film by seeing the box art and reading the description. It's like the film was not crafted for that. The film is crafted in a way that it kind of puts you, the viewer, to kind of uncover what's happening at the village with the lead character, which leads to a pretty satisfying ending, but knowing what was going to happen because of the backs of the box art took away a lot from that scene. A lot of the film is just building the character of the village and the father and son. We spend a lot of time with them as they become a part of the village. The film's first 2 acts honestly kind of feel whimsical and lighthearted despite the darker underbelly of the film, which when the tonal shift of the film finally happens, it becomes kind of really screwed up. Like the tone gets really dark really fast and pretty unnerving. The film does have some weird moments where the film kind of sets up the father at the beginning to be somewhat of a loser and not really the best father, but that kind of feels like it was just set up to be a misdirect, but it did kind of start me off the audience of kind of not liking the father. This could kind of be a way to put the audience in the mind of a villager, but it was something that I kind of noticed. Going into the film expecting a horror film, I was really confused by the really hokey moments and the fact that the horror literally does not come out at all until the final act, which I know my review is kind of doing the same thing as the backs of the box art, but I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, if you read anything about this film or even watch any review, I'm sure it pops up. Most of the film is kind of a comedy that has a horror underbelly. Still though, kind of going into this film with a different set of expectations, I still had a really good time with this one. Surprisingly, some of the CGI rats looked way better than they had any right to be. Other times they look pretty goofy for sure, but I was surprised at some points by the CGI. The film looks great, from the cinematography to the village design to the gore effects. The musical choices were fitting, and I like the idea to include the flute or pipe into the score throughout the film. I will say I kind of wish they did it a little bit more and kind of leaned into it a little bit more. It felt like they weren't like fully going all in with that pipe and flute throughout the score, but it was a nice touch. All in all, this is a pretty solid mystery horror that I kind kind of wish I went into completely blindly, but maybe it's one of those ones that on a second viewing I'll have a much better experience with a completely different set of expectations. I still really enjoyed this one, and this is one that could go up or down on a second viewing, but I definitely recommend checking this one out, and I'm giving it a 7 out of 10 for now. Contraband is a film directed by Lucio Fulci, a director that maybe I need to get somewhat more into, because the only films I've seen from him so far is Zombie and now Contraband. I really liked both of them. Contraband was a film given to me as a Christmas gift last Christmas from my buddy Austin. Thanks man, you really hit the spot this year for 31 for 31. The film is an Italian film where everything is just dubbed over, you know, those kind of giallo styles. You know how these productions go. Sure, the dubbing isn't synced the best, but you do get used to it after a while. The film follows two brothers who are cigarette smugglers in Italy when everything starts to go wrong. The police get involved, their stable burns down, and then one of the brothers is killed, which leads to our main character Luca to go after the people involved, which we learn that a rival smuggler is bringing in narcotics. This film is just so much fun. It's super violent, leading to some truly disturbing moments with a blowtorch and another scene with Luca's wife, but the film isn't afraid to just hit you, and it doesn't hold its punch. But where the violence is here, in a semi-popcorn way, it can come off as pretty disturbing in moments because there's a real heart at the center of the film, Luca and his family. Luca is not a good guy at all. He's a complex character that's lifestyle choices causes a lot of issues for him and his family. He's trying to do what's right by them, but in the wrong way, which only causes more damage to him and his family. Think of something like The Sopranos, where Tony Soprano is honestly a very evil dude, but as an audience, you kind of somewhat sympathize or maybe even empathize with him because of how deeply complex his character is. While Luca is nowhere near on the same scale as a character like Tony Soprano, there is enough complexity to Luca to make a comparison as a deeply troubled and flawed character that pulls in the audience. Sure, Luca is played to be more of a good guy for the story, but his actions can kind of undermine what the narrative is trying to present in that way, which I think is actually a pretty fascinating aspect to the film. The film spends little time developing its world expositionally, but instead allows you to just live in the world with the characters, those characters who help to naturally develop the world. The family and its orbiting characters are where the true sense of life come from. This is a truly fun gangster crime thriller that has a solid core to it that's an easy recommendation, and I honestly think I might like it better than Zombie, and I'm giving this one a 7.5 out of 10. I definitely will watch this again sometime soon. Candyman. I remember picking up the first Candyman and going into the film with little to no expectations, other than it's like one of those horror films that orbits those like center classic slasher films, but it's one I've always wanted to see. After watching it for the first time a few years ago, I was really blown away with the film, as I not only thought it was kind of maybe one of the best horror films of the 90s, but also maybe one of the best horror films I've ever seen. With the film having 2 sequels and a pretty awful remake, I ventured out to get my hands on more Candyman. Candyman 3 Day of the Dead was put out by Vestron Video, and I grabbed it on release from Walmart. But that kind of left me looking for Candyman 2 Farewell to the Flesh that I honestly had a really hard time finding until I came across it one day at a Half Price Books. Well, Candyman 3 Day of the Dead ended up being picked for this year for 31 for 31, so I decided to rewatch the first film and finally see the full trilogy. I will not be covering the remake. I think it's genuinely awful and I do not want to watch it again, and you can't make me. I will also say that I'll be excluding Candyman from my top 5 of this year's 31 for 31. Every year at the end of the series, on the last entry, I make a top 5 list of my favorite films from the challenge, and there's no doubt that Candyman would have made my top 5, if not the top of it, but since I've already seen the film before, I'm going to disqualify it from the top 5, but Candyman 2 and 3 might show up, who knows. Candyman from 1992 is directed by Bernard Rose and is a film that follows Helen Lyle, played by Virginia Madsen, a college grad student dating a professor as she begins to study about the Candyman, an urban legend in the Cabrini Green about a man with a hook for a hand that if you say his name 5 times in the mirror, he will appear. When the Candyman appears, Helen becomes connected to these gruesome murders, and she must figure out how to stop the Candyman, all while also trying not to be the suspect to every murder. This is such a great and brutal horror film, steeped in mythology, social commentary, and blood. The Candyman is without a doubt, in my opinion, one of the most imposing horror icons in the genre. He feels like a true force to be reckoned with because he's almost unstoppable.
Be my victim. dum.
is one of the most haunting catchphrases I think of like all time. The Candyman feels like a meticulous evil that can be somewhat cautious to play into his vengeance, churning out bodies but also hurting those in a mental and emotional way as well. No one feels safe from the Candyman. Mix out with his tragic backstory that can almost lend a level of sympathy to the villain that makes him a pretty unique and special one in the rogue gallery of these kind of icons. Pair all that with the fur-lined coat, hook for a hand, and an open chest of bees with Tony Todd's rumbling voice, and you have a villain that commands your attention. Mixing this together with an amazing score by Philip Glass and beautiful cinematography by Anthony B. Richmond, you can escape that grindhouse-esque motif for something that you might see from the art house. With the backbone of the film being from Clive Barker, you can clearly see that this will be a demented and hellish one. Candyman will get under your skin one way or the other, blending its horror with real social commentary of public housing, systemic racism, and the white savior complex that feels to elevate its horror elements while also wiggling that little horror worm into your brain. This is my second time watching Candyman, and I absolutely adore this film through and through, and it might be a yearly Halloween watch for me, and I'm giving this one a 9 out of 10. It's one of my favorites. Candyman 2 Farewell to the Flesh, released in 1995 following the 1992 film, replaces pretty much everybody involved besides Tony Todd returning as the Candyman, and Philip Glass doing the score. This time set in New Orleans and follows a woman and her brother as her father becomes obsessed with Candyman lore, leading to his death. Annie, played by Kelly Rowan, must figure out the history of Candyman to help her brother, who is arrested for murder. Honestly, besides like some Mad Libs, this is the exact same story as the first film. The film focuses much more this time on the Candyman lore, but it's the same lore we already learned in the first film, just told it much slower this time around. The premise is pretty much the exact same. Someone provokes the Candyman, Candyman does the Candyman thing, and the main character that provoked him is starting to be blamed for the killings. Everything here feels a little lesser. The score feels more like a reuse of the original and not really like a new score that's within the same universe. The cinematography is much worse, and so is Candyman's design. Tony Todd is still great, but there's some detail changes that just look worse to his character. The Candyman still feels like a massive threat on screen, but touches of that lost social commentary really leaves me feeling like this is just a more generic movie than a sequel to something that was really special. The film has a really solid setup with the author of the Candyman book that was the character in the first film, and a family that has connections to the Candyman lore along with the backdrop in New Orleans as our new location, but we don't explore anything new here. The author is finished off instantly, the family ties to Candyman don't really matter that much, the film being set in New Orleans doesn't add anything. It feels like there was some good ideas here that was just lost on what to do with them. If this film was a standalone and not tied to the original, this would just be a pretty bland and forgettable 90s horror film. There's nothing really here that's really that awful, but it's just missing all the spices of the first film that made it stand out. This would just be a forgettable film even if it didn't retread the same grounds of the first film. I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. Candyman 3 Day of the Dead, the film that was actually picked for 31 for 31, is terrible. Honestly, everything negative I have to say about the second one is here as well, adding a cheaper feel to every aspect as well. The costume for Candyman looks bad, the hook on the hand looks really cheap, the film looks terrible from the cinematography, and Philip Glass leaves to bring in Adam Gorgani. I don't know how you say his last name, doesn't matter because the score sucks. It even loses like its musical identity. It doesn't even feel connected to any of the universe, doesn't even feel like a reuse of the original film that much. It's just bland. It's so boring and forgettable. Sure, like the second film score feels like a retread of the first, but this doesn't even feel like it fits in the same universe. Jumping across locations again to Los Angeles and into the future as Caroline McKeever, the daughter of Annie from the second film, is all grown up now, and she attends an art gallery by her lover Miguel, which is all about Candyman, which this art in this gallery just looks so cheaply made. From here, the film is the exact same plot as the other two movies. Candyman murks some people and the main character or someone close to the main character is blamed, and they have to solve the Candyman issue and clear their name of the, what the Candyman's doing. It's the same thing. Each film has basically done the same thing, with each installment getting drastically worse than the one before it. They've completely forgot what made the first one so special. Even if the film wasn't connected to Candyman, which, by the way, we don't learn any new lore, but instead repeating and refilming the exact same lore as the other two films. But like, if none of the other films existed and this was the first time we see Candyman, this movie would still suck fat. Sure, Tony Todd is still enjoyable and there are a few good kills, but that's all the film has going for it. Everything else really sucks, and I do mean sucks. Funny enough though, I do think this film has the best cover art of the three. I'm giving this one a 3 out of 10. Boo. I will say that I'm glad I finally checked out the Candyman trilogy and I've crossed this one off my list, but honestly, I'm just gonna pretend like the sequels don't even exist. They add nothing to the original, and honestly, they kind of undermine the original film's ending, which, by the way, what the original film does at the end of it actually sets up for better sequel ideas than what we actually got. I don't want to spoil the first film in case you haven't seen it, but it would have been much more interesting to go that route than it would have with what these two films did. To me, honestly, this should have just been a one and done. It was lightning in the bottle. Candyman's a cool character, but they did nothing with it. And I'm perfectly fine with thinking in my head that, hey, it's only the original. I 1000% implore you to check out the first film and ignore the sequels and the remake. But with that being said, that was 31 for 31. So let's talk about my top 5 31 for 31 this year. Number 5, we got Sailor Suit and Machine Gun. Number 4, we have Dogville. Number 3, we have High and Low. Number 2, we have Mother. And my number 1 of the year, Stalker. Stalker was great. I'm really glad I got to go through this again. I really enjoyed it. There's a lot of good movies here this time around. A lot of movies I really enjoyed. A lot of movies that I can either get rid of or, I can just finally cross off my list. With that being said, I think I'm going to do something a little different for next year's 31 for 31. But anyway, I'll see y'all later. Bye.